I'm Mark Pieszak. I'm the founder and CTO of DevHelp Online, and it's a consulting, development, training firm. We're located in Florida right now, but work with a lot of different startups, the Fortune 500 companies right now, trying to help them upgrade their Angular projects and basically get their teams up to speed, things like that. So, and today we're going to talk about, I skipped that slide, sorry. So we're going to talk about Angular Universal, but before I get into that, I kind of wanted to give you guys just a general background and like a nice, basically history of the web, and let's talk about like server-side rendering, JavaScript in general, you know, because I think to me it's like the future of the web, or at least for some of it. So anyway, like I said, I'm Mark. Check out our website, DevHelp Online. It's still in the works, so right now it's very bare bone. There's that really serious photo of me. I'm actually a fun guy. I don't know why. I think I need to update that. And I'm actually also part of the Angular Universal team. So I work with a couple of guys from the Google Angular core team and a lot of open source people to kind of build upon and improve the Angular Universal, which, if anyone's never heard of it, it's basically rendering Angular in Node. So I'll get into that. So who am I? Just so you remember my name, because it's kind of silly. It's Mark Pieszak, but just spelled funny. It's Polish, so go figure. You can find me online at Mark Pieszak. I try to blog as much as I can, hopefully more soon. But if you want to talk about anything Angular in general, just hit me up on Twitter. Always free to chat. So, all right, so story time. I kind of wanted to start out with talking about, in general terms, the web, right? And where we came from, where we've been, and kind of, at least where I see it going. So, you know, to me, it kind of, you know, obviously it started way before this, but everything started out kind of server rendered, right? So we had things like PHP, .NET, anything, JSP, whatever, right? And there was a lot of pros to that and a lot of cons. So kind of to get started, let's say, I'm just going to generalize that whole period of time and call it server-side rendered, right? Obviously, it's gotten a lot better since then, but I kind of wanted to have some laughs and how bad it used to be, right? So this used to be Google, pretty ugly, right? I mean, this was Amazon, if anyone remembers. And we used to do a lot of chatting. There was instant messenger, there was chat rooms, and you know, some things have changed, but some things kind of stay the same, right? Everything's been replaced. Now we have Facebook Messenger, we have Slack, and we've almost gone full circle, right? It's pretty strange, but it's the way the world works, right? So some of the things with server-side rendering that I thought was always really beneficial and like they did well was, you know, we didn't realize how good we had it back then when, let's say you're doing a PHP app or whatever. SEO is as easy as just basically adding a bunch of tags, right? Just meta tags, your title. It was super simple, right? It was great for static sites, a lot of other things, right? But some of the things that, you know, it was lacking, right, was mainly user experience. You know, we had, to get to any page, you had to do a full reload, right? Everything constantly. So like there wasn't that rich, immersive experience, you know? So, you know, and everything, there was a lot more server requests in general, right? So, you know, what did the web do? You know, flipped everything upside down, and all of a sudden the cool thing was single-page applications, right? So whether you did a hybrid with a little jQuery or you went full React or Angular, you know, what have you, single-page applications now are cool, right? Kind of cool. So I'm going to call them client-side rendering from now on, like CSR. So if you've never seen these acronyms, don't worry. I think we made them up. But but with single-page applications, basically this happened. And we had this massive ecosystem, which is basically a nightmare to work with. And every few weeks, you kind of felt like this, right? I mean, you kind of were never sure of yourself. It's like, am I making the right choice, you know? One day Angular, next day Vue, then there's React, then there's a million other ones. So it can get a little frustrating. But some of the things that client-side rendering does really well, of course, is user experience, right? So that's kind of why everyone switched, right? So we got that really immersive experience, everything, you could immediately see when things were happening, right? The really quick page transitions. It's perfect for really complex web apps and things with real-time data. And, the best thing is really it feels like things are happening, right? You click on something and maybe a modal moves, there's animations, right? You can't do that with server-side rendering, so a lot of good stuff. But some of the downside, right, of course, is no SEO, right? So typically when you view source on any front-end app, this is what you see, right? You just basically nothing, and it's not personalized for that exact route or anything, right? So basically nothing. And of course, in general, longer load time. So you get to that route, and then you have to load, megabytes of JavaScript files, and then all of those have to run and process, and then bootstrap your app. So you see this a lot, and that's also kind of a con, right? I mean, if someone is on a slower network, let's say 3G, and it takes 5 seconds for your app to start up, Google's done like experiments and stuff on this. Typically, if a page takes longer than 3 seconds, most people will actually leave. So you actually get a lot of bounce rate because of that. So once again, kind of not a good thing, right? So with all this together, you basically just rewrote your app. Now you did it in React or Angular, and all of a sudden you realize this isn't good either, and your boss is pissed, and then you're throwing your phone on the ground. So what do we do from here, right? So the goal really, ideally what we want is we want the best of both worlds, right? We want SEO, we want that really quick paint, you see the application right away. We want, if I copy and paste the link to Twitter or Facebook, you want to see that preview with the image and metadata. And, we want the user experience, we want it to be interactive. It almost sounds delusional, right, if it's possible. So, can we get that, right? So the next kind of shift that I noticed in the web in general was someone in, I think, 2013 coined the term isomorphic JavaScript, which sounds kind of like a weird chemistry experiment. I think it's a crazy word. I prefer the word universal, and I think that's why the creators of it called it that. I mean, the idea of it is basically you want it to run on both environments, right? The browser and the server. So in general, the how it all works, right? You have your JavaScript code, and we want that same code to run on a server and on the browser. So that's basically isomorphic or universal, whatever you want to call it, which to me sounded like a fairy tale, because I was like, how could you ever do that? Like, there must be a million, that's kind of how I felt. This was years ago when I first heard of it, and I thought it was a joke. I thought there's no way that's possible. I have to see it first, right, to believe it. So, but someone then explained to me what it really was. So it's basically the code, you have your code, you send it to the server, it's supposed to serialize it, right? So it takes your entire app at whatever URL or whatever portion of it you're at, creates all the HTML for that, sending it to the browser. The browser then in the background, since it has those big bundles, starts loading them. It starts downloading them and bootstrapping. And then at the end of the day, everything finishes, and all of a sudden you have a client-side app. Did everybody catch that, or did I go too quick? We'll be going over it in a second anyway. So here comes Angular Universal. So I came to the project about 2 years ago, and Angular Universal was their solution to kind of handle this and make this work. Because if you remember in AngularJS, which is the older version, right, it wasn't possible to do this because AngularJS was really tied to the browser, right? Everything was based on the DOM and things like that. The new Angular is very abstract, so that's why everything's done using all these abstract syntax trees and things like that. So you're able to create your app in different environments. So if you've ever used NativeScript as well, it's done similarly, right? So NativeScript takes your app and basically renders it on a mobile device for iOS or Android, and it's able to do this because of how abstract it is. So they basically create their own engine on top of Angular's. So Universal does the same thing, and The founders of our creators were Patrick Stapleton, you might know him as Patrick JS, and Jeff Welpley, really good friends of mine. So they created this project because they needed this for their projects, right? And Jeff Welpley actually has created I think he has it working in production, but for AngularJS, he actually has a way to server render it. So if you want to find him on Twitter, bug him about it. I think it's online somewhere, I forget the link. But so anyway, so these guys actually created it, and to me it's kind of amazing because the whole project actually didn't come from the Angular core team itself. It's originated by people like us, right? Just random open source people, and then eventually got moved into core this year. So some of the other people on the team, me of course, right? Jason Jean, who doesn't put his picture online, Alex, Rikba, and Vikram from the Angular core team, Jeff Cross, who was also used to be on the core team, now he's at Norwal, and Wasim Chegman from Saphir, and a lot of other people, a lot of big contributors. But yeah, so like I was saying, it was open source, it was its own repo, and now it's actually part of Angular. So if you've ever tried to use it in the past, it's a lot safer now. It's a lot more tested. And it's actually within the same code base, so you can it's really production ready now. It was before, but not really. So kind of like we were just showing, so the way we handle it, right, is you take your Angular app, right, so that's your root component and everything inside of it. You're gonna run it on Node using something called render module factory, right? This is just like an overview, don't worry. We're gonna take the whole app, basically turn it to a long string, send it to the browser. In the background, we load all of your Angular bundles, everything. And then platform browser does its thing. And then, boom. So everything you've already known, right? Now we have a normal single page application with Angular, right? And actually recently, Jason Jean from Forbes got Angular, the CLI integrated with Universal. So this actually makes it a lot easier to start, and if you even want to take a look at it now, if you're on a computer, just go to Angular/Universal Starter. Just make sure you go to the CLI folder, because there's 2 different versions on there. So now with the CLI, it's a lot easier. All of the crazy Webpack stuff's hidden, and it's a lot easier to get started, right? And you can see there's 2 different ways to get it running and everything like that. I'll get into those in a second. Oh, and if you already have an Angular CLI, has anybody used the CLI before? Oh, we've got a few, awesome. So if you already have an Angular app written in it, you can check out the CLI wiki at that. It's actually a really long link. I tried to shorten it. Check it out there because it has like how you can get started with it easily. So before I get into kind of how it works, I wanted to show you guys what it is. So you know what I'm talking about, right? So this is right here, a static, this is a regular Angular app, this one, right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slow it down a little bit to do like a fast 3G, and just so we can see the transition a little better. And I'm just gonna reload real quick. So this is kind of what you're used to, right? Let's say on a phone, you get that loading screen. This is also a really simple app. So the fact that it even takes a few seconds is crazy enough, right? So you can see we get that loading, which is kind of ugly, right? Sorry, I didn't style this very much. And you can see it took about like 4 seconds on a fast 3G just to finish bootstrapping the app, right? So like we were saying earlier, if certain people will leave a site within a few seconds if it doesn't even, if they don't see something they can work with, start scrolling, interacting with it. So, so this is just a regular Angular CLI loading everything client-side rendering, right? Right over here, we have the same exact app, but we're gonna do fast 3G as well. And we're going to, hopefully this is the right one. There it is, okay. So here we have it using Universal. So in this case, I don't really have much going on in this app, so it took 100 milliseconds for it to get that initial paint. So basically the device, it's usually a little slower than that, but I'm obviously localhost. Yeah, so I mean, we basically hit the server rendered it so quickly, and the device immediately got a painted app, which is great. And then you could see behind the scenes, it was then creating it, and it also took 3.5 seconds for it to become a client-side app. But like anyone looking at your app or on a device or on the web, they got the impression and like the perception, right, that it's really quick, and there's something there. And I mean, no one's going to go to it and immediately start clicking on stuff. So even if it takes a few seconds, you're fine, you know. And more importantly, if we do view source for both of these, this is the client-side rendered one. And oh, can you guys see that at all? It's obviously all truncated. This is like production, right? You can see there's really nothing in here. We have this app root, and I statically put in this loading text, right? We have the meta viewport, but there's no title. The title is the original index title. We don't have any meta tags. We don't have anything, right? We go over to the universal version, same exact thing, but now you can actually see the whole app is, or maybe you can't see it. There it is. Is that better? Right? So now you can see everything actually got rendered. So inside of this app root, you can see we took the H1s, the image, all the URLs, the code that we got from Node, and even some of the meta tags. You can see the title changed to Plone fan page, home. And I don't know if I added any metas. Here, I'll show you. This one has some. Oop. Bear with me here. Here we go. So this is just a different route. So you can see in here, I actually loaded it up with all of the meta tags. And it's literally just as easy as it used to be. There's an Angular service called Meta. Just include it in any component. You can have it be part of the router, whatever. And you basically just update tags in there. And you say, for meta name Twitter card, I want it to be this. For Twitter site, I want it to be my hashtag, whatever. So you can see everything here. We got Plone conf, lazy loading page. And, later on today, I'm going to post this whole example so you guys can take a look and mess around with it. It's really easy to use, and you know, does that make sense? Right? Pretty cool, I thought. All right, so behind the scenes, basically it's a lot of dependency injection, right? Which is anyone unfamiliar with dependency injection? Right? It's, you know, you're basically swapping things out. So you're saying every time I want to use logger, swap it out for super logger, right? And you don't have to change your code base at all. All your code can stay the same. You can still reference logger, but behind the scenes it's actually going to call super logger, right? And a lot of these things, like I was saying earlier, are possible because Angular's compiler and the renderer, they're not based on the browser, right? So we're able to swap these things out and say, instead of creating the app for a browser, create it for Node, right? And of course, a little bit of magic. So these are some of the things that are typical, you know, when an app's being created, right? So you have like the renderer, you have, anytime you're doing HTTP calls, typically going to call browser HTTP, right? The platform location is anytime the route changes, things like that. And obviously the way all of your styles are rendered, right? Because on the browser, there's native, you can emulate things. So what we do for Universal is basically swap them out and provide something different, right? So anytime the app is about to render things, we use a server renderer, which is, it knows you're in Node land, so it creates them differently, right? And anytime you make an HTTP call, we're actually going to use Node's XHR to make the request in Node, but you know, everything's wrapped in zones, right, which is a part of the Angular library. And zones is basically like, it's just a wrapper around, let's say, timeouts, anything async. It lets you know when things are done, when things go wrong, right? So we wrap everything around in that so we're aware of it, right? So if any of your HTTP calls make an error, or like when they're done, Angular knows, and basically this is how the app knows it's finished rendering, right? Because let's say you get to an app, and you make 2 HTTP calls, one for products and one to see if they're authenticated, right? Because of this, we're able to be aware of it in Node when they're both done. And since the rendering, everything else finished, all the HTML, your HTTP is done, we say, okay, we're all set, and then we send it off to the browser. You know, so kind of a long story there, sorry. I don't know if anybody cares. And then a lot of other fun stuff like document has been changed to domino, which is just an abstract syntax tree. It's just it's like a JSON representation, not JSON. It's like a long object of your HTML, right? So think of your whole app as objects, So you have like your body tag, and then it has children, and that's all of your divs and everything in there. So, like I said, things are different in Node, right? And the other two, same kind of thing. We're just making sure we know how to deal with styles and how to deal with routes changing. So sorry, that was a little bit behind the scenes, right? So this is the typical Angular app, right? You've got your app module, you have your main TypeScript file, and then platform browser. So basically with Universal, all we're doing is forking it, right? We have two different branches of it. So we're going to have an app server module, a main server, and platform server, right? And this is for our Node server. Everything in Angular app is basically your main component and your normal app. So you don't have to touch anything there. You're basically just creating a little bit different starting point for your app, right? Based on the environment. And this will be really similar if you, like I was saying, if you've done native script, it's done similarly. So just to dig in a little deeper, right? Normally you're using browser module, right? So in app server, we're actually going to import everything that your app module has. So you can see it's like an extension of your normal app. And then we're going to import server module, right? And what all server module is doing is a lot of that dependency injection we were just talking about. So in there, this is like in the actual code, these providers are like, there's like 30 things inside of there. They're basically just dependency injecting over top of everything normal, right? You don't have to worry about this. I was just showing you in case you're curious. So this is all you need, but behind the scenes, it's doing all the magic, right? I'm just trying to make it not as mysterious, And so the other thing that's cool is with something like this, there's two options you can go, right? You can statically generate all of your pages at build time, or you could do them at runtime, right? And so what does that mean? If you wanted to generate static ones, you could think of like a CMS, right? And your pages aren't that dynamic, or there's maybe only certain pages you want to generate. So in this case, I'm statically going to generate index, about, and contact us, right? And they're going to, once you create them with Universal, they're just going to toss them in your dist folder, and you can literally just serve that up however you'd like. And those will be regular HTML pages, but they'll be fully rendered versions of your app. Dynamically rendering is done at runtime, right? So in this case, we're actually going to have that Node server, and every request that comes in for whatever route, for homepage, for about us, for products, it's going to do it at runtime because let's say you're Amazon, you can't statically generate bicycles, right? You need every time it's going to be completely different. So this is usually the use case most people are going to go down, And I'll get into this. This is kind of the gist of it. Don't use this code right here because it's kind of just mock. But you could see right here, so I'm basically saying for every request, this is a Node server, by the way, for Express. For every request, I'm just going to pass in that AOT'd Angular module, right? And AOT just means like ahead of time compiled. Going to pass in that original index HTML page, which usually is very blank, right? It just has like your app root, the current URL, and when it's finished, I'm just going to pass the HTML to the browser. So really, it's nothing fancy. This is kind of all you need, and then a few things like I was showing in the previous slide. It takes more than a few minutes, but if you download the starter, all this will be hooked up for you. You don't have to worry about it. And it's pretty well documented as well. So in there, you can kind of get a good idea of where to start, what's what, what's the purpose of everything. So this is you doing everything manually and with Render Module Factory, but I'd recommend just use we created an Express engine, which kind of does some of this piping for you. You can find it at Angular/Universal. And there's actually more libraries in there, and there's more to come. So this namespace, and this is actually where the old Universal used to be. It's going to be, now it's going to be filled with third-party and open source modules, things that make your apps better, or pretty much anything for Universal, anything you'd want. So keep an eye on that. And using the engine, look, it's a lot cleaner. We pass in that app server module, and that's it. And you can see right here, we're actually passing in the same thing. So for every request, we're just rendering the engine. If you're not familiar with Express engines, don't worry about it. But it's doing what we did on that last page and some, just behind the scenes. And we're actually passing in every single request and response. So, why does this matter? What's nice is now, because we're doing that, inside of your Angular app, you can actually, using the injector, you can grab these things. So you can grab during a server render, you can actually grab the request and response. So let's say you have cookies or authentication data or anything. You could pass in anything through a node and access it within your app. So let's say they're already logged in, and you want the server render to say, welcome, Matt, or whatever. Using this, you can grab all that data and actually make it within your app. Everybody with me so far? Hopefully. Sorry if it's a bit much. I know it's a little crazy, but it's worth it. So I kind of want some of these next few slides are basically, I wanted to go over typical gotchas and problems with SSR. So these will happen no matter how you do it. So no matter what framework or anything, one important thing to realize is that each one is going to render. So when you hit the server, it's going to render your app. It's going to do it one more time on the client side, right? So why does that matter? If you make an HTTP call in component, let's say component C here, it's going to trigger it again on the client. And the reason that something like that might matter is because it's actually going to flicker, right? So first you're going to get like all those bicycles, let's say. Then they're going to disappear right before it bootstraps, or right when it does bootstrap, and then they're going to appear again. So not only are you hitting the server twice, you're getting kind of a bad user experience, things like that. And I'll show how to fix that in a second. If you use anything like window or document inside your app, it's not going to end well, right? Those things exist in the browser, but Node is just going to throw a real sweet error that doesn't really explain anything and just shut down. So no bueno. So how can we take care of some of these problems, right? So coming up in the newest, in 5.0, there's actually going to be something called transfer state. So right now that's in RC. I don't think it came out just yet. But what this is going to do is you can either manually set things to transfer, or using the transfer HTTP cache module, it'll automatically do all of that wiring for you. And it's as easy as literally adding these few imports. So for your app module and your app server module, you just include the cache module. You could see there's one for the browser and one for the server, right? Now when we make that call, it's actually going to send all of that data down over the wire in the index file as like a JSON blob. And it's going to reuse it on the client. So it's kind of nice. So not only did you save you didn't make 2 round trips to the server, you got rid of the flicker, and the user, once again, had no idea. They just think your app's crazy fast, right? So yeah, like another one I was saying, like be careful with the window, right? It's only on the browser. But with dependency injection, right, you could take advantage of it in your app and do whatever you want. So right over here, I kind of just made this is kind of like a window, right? Very mock. You could put as much or as little as you want in here. And then in here, you can see I just kind of stubbed a few things, right? For the browser, I'm going to use dependency injection and provide the actual window. And you can see I'm doing type of window. You want to make sure it's not undefined. Otherwise, you don't want the server to use this, because like if I just had window there, once again, Node would have blown up. So this is kind of like a workaround hack, right? So for the browser, we're actually getting the window. This whole service actually got replaced with the massive window object with everything that's normally in there. For the server, you can see we're actually providing and using that mock. So because in the server we don't want to touch the navigator, we don't want to do location. We want to make sure anytime someone does window, nothing happens, right? And that line's a little there. Don't worry about it. Right in here, another big, I'd say, pro tip is with Universal we have something called is platform browser. So whenever you want in your code, you can actually make tests to see and make sure that which platform you're in. So you can see here, I'm taking advantage of a couple of things, right? So one, we're making sure we're in the browser, and then I'm using that Windows service to do something crazy like use jQuery, right? Which everyone, you're not supposed to do with Angular, but people do. Apps sometimes need certain things, right? The world's not perfect, but by doing this, we can actually do whatever we want. So this code basically is completely ignored on the server, but in this case, in the browser, I'm going to do something to the window, or to the body, sorry. So kind of cool. It's just a way of basically ignoring things, like hiding it from Node. You know, Node's pretty strict. And also something new in 5.0 is you can actually use that document that is provided in the Node environment, the one I was talking about that's like an object, a JavaScript object, anywhere you want. You can actually use it like almost like it's the browser. So in here, I'm actually querying a selector. And so anything you normally could do, you can do, and this would actually work in Node, which is kind of cool. So this kind of just shows what we were just talking about. So this is the same thing, component using it. The browser can actually uses window, but because of this, Node keeps running. We don't actually use window in here. So far, so good. Is anybody really confused or not yet? One other big gotcha is just make sure, with any, this is the same thing with any framework, really be careful with set timeouts and intervals, right? Because these things are going to slow down your server render, right? If you put a set timeout or an interval that just never ends, you're never going to get a server render, right? It's just going to keep going in Node, never stop. So same thing, wrap them with is browser. If you want to be really careful, which I usually like to, just use that Windows service just to make sure you're using the right one. And this, like I said before, just ignores it in Node. So that way you get that really fast paint. Because if, let's say in your code you have a little set timeout of a second, and then you do some kind of animation. There is no animations in Node, so might as well ignore it, right? And of course, if you guys want more, there's a bunch of more gotchas and definitely more documentation coming soon. We know that's one of our biggest problems right now. So check out Angular Universal if you want to see a little bit more on that. Let me see. Oh, yep. So in conclusion, I think with all this you can get, I think the beauty of it now is we can get SEO, we got social media previews, we can, oh, why is it missing some of my stuff? Of course. There was a couple more in there, sorry about that. But basically, now I think we can get the best of both worlds. We can, you have SEO, you have really fast initial paint of your application, yet it's still really interactive, right? So, yeah, rich user experience. You could post it on Twitter. Everything's there you want, as long as you provide it. Just be really careful of what you do. So, if you're used to doing kind of things, however, it's a little more strict, but that's okay. The good thing is by doing this, your app at the end of the day is cleaner. It's more platform performant and more reliant, right? And at the same time, you can even take your app and move it to something like NativeScript, which is done. A lot of these things apply to NativeScript. So if you get used to these things, you can really easily make your app mobile as well. So they have server rendered, mobile, everything. And one thing I can't stress enough, be really careful with third-party libraries, because if you pick, I don't know, Joe Schmo's random library, he could have window everywhere and it'll just blow up. And when something like that happens, you have to actually use Webpack and swap it out, and that gets a little confusing. So try to find ones like ng Bootstrap. Material is like almost compliant. Like there's certain libraries that are they really do things carefully, and you won't have any problems with, right? Oh, there they are. All right, that's strange. So with server-side render, we also got rid of that loading splash screen, right? Which I don't know if we saw in the demo. Right, so this is the server-side rendered one. When I push F5, immediately we see the app, right? Right over here, get that loading. So now that's gone, which normally doesn't matter. If you're on a quick, If you have quick internet or anything like that, it's fine, but most of the world has 3G, right? And if your customers are using 3G, this stuff should matter. It's gonna be a lot better for them. They're gonna have that perception, even if it takes a few seconds for them to get that render, they're used to it probably taking 15 for some complex site to load. And a nice, very loose metric is typically it'll be like 2 to 3 times faster for like an initial paint. So depending on what you have going on. Just remember, if you have an HTTP call that takes 5 seconds, it's going to wait 5 seconds for it to render, right? So doing some of those tricks we were showing earlier, you can actually maybe make sure you ignore that call on the server, things like that. Oh. So we went from this to this ugly thing. But now we have all of our code, right? We got our titles, our metas. And you can see down at the bottom even like, that's like some of the HTTP call that was cached and sent along with it. So like we were saying earlier, can we get the best of both worlds? I mean, I think yes, but it takes a little bit of work, but I think it's worth it. And thank you guys.